And if he has even shared in the blessing of the Vedas, which have been made accessible to us through the Upanishads, and which, to my mind, is the chief advantage that this still young century enjoys over the previous one. And in fact, I expect the influence of the Sanskrit literature to have as profound effect on us as the revival of Greek literature had on the 15th century. So, as I was saying, if the reader has also already received and been receptive to the consecration of the ancient Indian wisdom, then he will be in the very best position to hear what I have to say to him. It will not strike him, as it will strike many others, as foreign or even inimical, since I would like to claim, if it does not sound arrogant, that each of the individual and disconnected remarks that form the Upanishads could be derived as a corollary of the thoughts I will be imparting, although conversely, my thoughts certainly cannot be found there. It is Maya, the veil of deception that covers the eyes of mortals, and lets them see a world that cannot be described as either being or not being, for it is like a dream, like sunlight reflected off sand, that a distant traveler mistakes for water, or like a discarded rope that the traveler thinks is a snake. These comparisons are repeated countless of times in the Vedas and the Puranas. What all these meant, what they were speaking about, is the very thing we are considering here, the world as representation, subject to the principle of sufficient reason. When we lose ourselves in the contemplation of the infinite extent of the world in space and time, reflecting on the millennia past and the millennia to come, or indeed when the night sky actually brings countless of worlds before our eyes, so that we become forcibly aware of the immensity of the world, and we feel ourselves reduced to nothing, feel ourselves as individuals, as living bodies, as transient appearances of the will, like drops in the ocean, fading away, melting away into nothing. But at the same time, rising up against such a specter of our own nothingness, against such a slanderous impossibility, is our immediate consciousness that all these worlds really exist only in our representation, only as modifications of the eternal subject of pure cognition, which is what we find ourselves to be as soon as we forget our individuality, and which is the necessary, the conditioning bearer, and support of all worlds and all times. The magnitude of the world, which we used to find unsettling, is now settled securely within ourselves. Our dependence on it is nullified by its dependence on us. Yet we do not reflect on all this straight away. Instead, it appears only as the felt consciousness that we are, in some sense, that only philosophy makes clear, one with the world, and thus not brought down, but rather elevated by its immensity. It is the felt consciousness of what the Upanishads of the Vedas repeatedly express in so many ways, but most exquisitely in that dictum already cited above. I am all these creations taken together, and there is no other being besides me. This is an elevation above one's own individuality, the feeling of the sublime. I will only add a few more things to the general description of the situation. We saw above that the evil person suffers constant, searing, inner misery through the violence of his will, and that when all objects of willing are exhausted, he finally cools the vicious thirst of his self-will in the sight of other people's pain. In comparison, if the negation of the will has arisen in someone, that person is full of inner joy and true heavenly peace. However poor, joyless, and deprived his situation might look from the outside. This is not the restless impulse of life, the cry of jubilation that is conditioned by a preceding or succeeding bout of violent suffering, which constitutes the behavior of someone with a lust for life. Rather, it is an imperturbable peace, a profound calm and inner serenity. And when we behold this person with our eyes, or in our imagination, we cannot help feeling the greatest longing, since we acknowledge that this alone is in the right and infinitely superior to everything else. And our better spirit calls to us the great dare to know. We feel very keenly that every fulfilled wish we seize from the world is really like alms that keep the beggar alive today so that he can starve again tomorrow. Resignation, on the other hand, is like an inherited estate. It frees its possessor from all cares permanently. We may recall from the third book that the aesthetic pleasure in the beautiful largely consists in the fact that we have entered into a state of pure contemplation, momentarily suppressing all willing, that is, all desires and concerns. We are free of ourselves, as it were. We are no longer the individual correlated with the individual thing, whose cognition is at the behest of its constant willing, for whom objects become motives. We are instead the eternal subject of cognition, cleansed of the will, correlated with the idea. And we know that these moments, when we are released from the cruel impulses of the will and emerge from the heavy ether of the earth, are the most blissful ones we experience. We can gather from this how blissful life must be for someone whose will is not merely momentarily placated, as it is in the pleasure of the beautiful, but calmed forever, indeed extinguished entirely except for the last glowing spark that sustains the body and is extinguished along with it. Such a person who, after many bitter struggles with his own nature, has ultimately prevailed completely, remains as only a pure, cognizing being, as an untarnished mirror of the world. Nothing can worry him anymore. Nothing more can excite him, because he has cut all the thousands of threads of willing that keep us bound to the world, and which, in the form of desires, fears, envy, and anger, drag us back and forth amid constant pain. He gazes back calmly and smiles back at the phantasm of this world that was once able to move and torment his mind as well, but now stands before him as indifferently as chess pieces after the game is over, looking like discarded masks the morning after carnival, although their forms taunted and disturbed us the night before. Life and its forms merely glide before him, like a fleeting appearance, like a gentle morning dream that floats by someone who is half awake, where reality is already shining through and cannot deceive anymore. And just like this dream, life and its forms finally disappear without any violent transition.